Rule number 21, believe.
Biggest risk you've ever taken?
I completely changed the course of my life and career when I discovered this thing called the why. I abandoned what I was doing and said I want to do that. And people thought I was crazy. They thought I went out of business. But I believed in it so much, I threw caution into the wind.
I think why has been the key my whole life. The word why.
It's a little kid question that we grow out of for some reason.
Rule number 22, develop mentorships.
Here's what I've learned about mentorship. Mentorship is not something you ask somebody to do. Like, will you be my friend? It doesn't work. I mean, we're trying to help them.
Question that we grow out of for some reason.
Rule number 22.
There are many people who came in like, what an amazing speech, and did nothing. We know more about design than you do. I'm telling you, is exactly the same. There were people who were much more experienced in the consulting world or the design world, What I have found is if you push the accountability onto, because when we argue, we're taking What I have found is if you push the accountability onto, because when we argue, we're taking accountability. This is better. This will help you. We're taking responsibility, accountability. But if we say, look, we've been doing this a bunch of years, we know more about design than you do, I'm telling you, for every reason that I can outline for you, why this will help you more. But if you don't want to do it, that's fine. It's your business. Do what you want. The minute you switch the accountability and put it all on them, amazingly, they're much more open to your opinion. Because now they're responsible.
Rule number 21, believe.
Biggest risk you've ever taken?
I completely changed the course of my life and career when I discovered this thing called the why. I abandoned what I was doing and said I want to do that. And people thought I was crazy. They thought I went out of business. But I believed in it so much, I threw caution into the wind.
I think why has been the key my whole life. The word why.
It's a little kid question that we grow out of for some reason.
Rule number 22, develop mentorships.
Here's what I've learned about mentorship. Mentorship is not something you ask somebody to do. Like, will you be my friend? It doesn't work like that. When you find somebody you get along with, you share values, you share beliefs, you spend time with them, you get to know them, you develop trust, you're vulnerable with them, you open up to them, and you discover that you become friends. It's what happens. You start off as simply acquaintances. In my experience, mentorship is exactly the same. There were people who were much more experienced than me, who had wisdom that I didn't have, and when I would call them, they would take my calls. And when I would ask them questions, they would always take the time to give me answers. And over the course of time, they became my mentors, like they became my friends. And I remember one time I was with one of my mentors, Ron Bruder, an amazing guy, and I was leaving his house and I put my arm around him and I said, I'm glad you're my mentor. And he looked at me and he said, I'm glad you're mine. And it caught me completely off guard. And true mentorship, like true friendship, is not a one-way street. It's not about one person only giving advice to the other. Both people are showing up to give, and both people are showing up to learn. But you can't ask someone to be your mentor, especially someone who's a total stranger, knock on their door and say, will you be my mentor, if they don't know you and you've never met them. It's like friendship. You cultivate a relationship, and if that person is always there for you and wants to see you thrive and succeed and believes in you, then perhaps they will become your mentor, like making a friend.
Rule number 23, put your why into action.
Discovering your why is just the beginning. In order to enjoy all the benefits of having a clearly articulated why, you'll need to have the courage and discipline to use it. Like Thomas Edison said, vision without execution is hallucination. There is an ideal order for implementing your why, though sometimes reality does get in the way, and it all starts with you. Our natural tendency is to start with the tangible. We define our value by what we do, so it takes practice to start with why. Like riding a bicycle, at first we're unsure, unsteady. We're in our heads thinking about all the things we need to do, pedal fast, keep enough speed so we don't fall over. We have to really concentrate. We may even fall over, even scrape our knees, but we get back on the bike and try again, and eventually it becomes natural. Starting with why is no different. At first, it feels awkward. It may not even work, but with practice, it will become so natural that you won't even be able to imagine a time when you couldn't do it, just like riding a bicycle. In time, your why will act as a filter for many of the decisions and choices you make. It becomes a tool to help you find a job or seize an opportunity in which you're more likely to succeed.
It removes a lot of the guessing. Here's a metaphor to show you what I mean. It's called the celery test. We're constantly asking people for their advice on what to do or how to do it. It's like going to a dinner party and somebody says, do you know what you need? You need M&Ms. We've done so well with M&Ms, you've got to use M&Ms. Somebody else says to us, rice milk. In this economy, you have to use rice milk. Someone else says to us, Kit Kats. You have to use Kit Kats. And somebody else says to you, it's all about celery. We go to the supermarket with all this good advice from all these smart people with brilliant case studies, and we buy everything. We buy Kit Kats and M&Ms, celery and rice milk. There's a lot of time we spend at the supermarket and a lot of money we spend at the supermarket. And when we get to the checkout lane, we're standing there with all these products in our hands and no one can see what we believe because we bought everything. But let's imagine we know our why. Let's imagine our why is to always be healthy and only do things that protect the health of our bodies. Now, which products do we buy? Given all the same advice from all the same smart people, this time we only buy celery and we only buy rice milk. They're the only two that make sense. We spend less time and less money at the supermarket. And when we're standing there in line with only celery and only rice milk, now people can see what we believe. Somebody walking past can say, hey, I can see that you're healthy, so am I. You just attracted an opportunity or a referral or a friend, simply by saying and doing the things that you believe. And the best part is it's scalable. As soon as I said the why, you knew exactly which products we were going to buy. This means the more you can articulate your why, the more others will know what you stand for and will be able to help you make the right decisions. From now on, you will work to ensure everything you do is a good fit. If you do too many things that aren't a good fit, you'll feel uncomfortable and people will feel that you're being inauthentic. On the other hand, when you start with why, your ability to stand out, find support, and work to all your natural strengths will flourish. With practice, you will learn to trust your why. You will eventually start to see your job and the things you do as ways to breathe life into your cause. And the better you get at it, the more you will feel that your life and everything you do has purpose. The best way to implement your why is to work at it slowly. You don't have to do all the tips we suggest. What is important is that you pick up to 3 and commit to practicing and using them now.
Rule number 24, be courageous.
What do good leaders have in common?
They have the courage to do the right thing. They're people of high character and high integrity. But for me, the big one is courage. It's very hard to be a leader. It's hard to speak truth to power very often. You might be the one that gets in trouble or lose your job. It's hard to do the right thing. It's much easier to do the expedient thing. And it's also a huge undertaking to be a leader every moment of every day. It's kind of like being a parent.
Rule number 25, interpret nervousness as excitement.
I was watching the Olympics, this last Summer Olympics, and I was amazed at how bad the questions were that the reporters would ask all the athletes. And almost always, they asked the same question, whether they were about to compete or after they competed. Were you nervous? Right? And to a T, all the athletes went, no, right? And what I realized is it's not that they're not nervous, it's their interpretation of what's happening in their bodies. I mean, what happens when you're nervous, right? Your heart rate starts to go, you sort of get a little tense, you get a little sweaty, right? You have expectation of what's coming, and we interpret that as, I'm nervous. Now, what's the interpretation of excited? Your heart rate starts to go, you're anticipating what's coming, right? You get a little sort of like tense. It's all the same thing. It's the same stimuli, except these athletes, these Olympic quality athletes have learned to interpret the stimuli that the rest of us would say is nervous as excited. They all say the same thing. No, I'm not nervous. I'm excited. And so I've actually practiced it just to tell myself when I start to get nervous that this is excitement. Yeah. And so I used to speak in front of a large audience and somebody would say, how do you feel? I used to say, a little nervous. Now when somebody says, how do you feel? I'm like, really excited, actually. And it came from just sort of telling myself, no, this is excitement. And it becomes a little bit automatic later on. But it's kind of a remarkable thing to deal with pressure by interpreting what your body is experiencing as excitement rather than nerves. And it's really kind of effective. It makes you want to rush forwards rather than pull back, and yet it's the same experience.
Rule number 26, have grand visions.
Vision here's the thing that's always boggled my mind, right? Why is it, on balance, not always, but on balance, why is it that small companies tend to be more innovative than big companies? Right? Small companies that are under-resourced, can't necessarily get the best and brightest, they're going to go out of business any day, and yet they come up with brilliant ideas. And big companies full of resources, full of amazing people, buy the little companies that come up with the good ideas. That's usually how big companies innovate. They buy the smaller ones, right? Why is that? Why is it that the most resourced companies tend not? And I think it's a question of reality. And what I mean by that is small companies, their vision is more distant than their grasp, right? They have delusions of grandeur. We're going to change the world, change industries, reinvent this, reinvent that. We have no money and no people, but so what? My point is the grasp is shorter than the vision. And I think what happens is as companies get bigger and bigger and bigger with more and more resources, what they start to do is one of two things. Either their visions become well within their grasp and they don't readjust the vision, or they actually bring the vision back to put within their grasps, right? Make things very achievable. Difficult, but achievable. For vision to truly be vision, it should feel unachievable. When a small business gets together and says, here's our vision, everybody goes like this. How are we going to do that? In big businesses, we say, here's a vision, everybody goes, all right, yeah, no, got it. We'll do a back plan, we got that. And I firmly believe that innovation is born out of the struggle. Innovation is born out of the resourcefulness that you're forced to figure out because literally the vision is way beyond your grasp. Regardless of how many resources you have, it should always feel overwhelming and impossible. Take a group of people with tons of resources, to give them a vision, they're going to go,
Okay. Rule number 27, serve others.
So how do you define success?
I think success is seeing those around you work to their natural best and creating momentum for a vision towards a vision that will last beyond yourself.
So a guy is driving a bus for 20 years, got to retire. He's on Madison Avenue in New York, packed every day as people getting on that bus and getting off. He has 2 kids, a wife, lives in Queens. He might call himself successful. Another guy might be vice president of that company who would call himself unsuccessful. So is success what you make of it?
So the success is defined. Success is a feeling. It's not a series of check marks and goals. I think people define success as finish lines. You know, I ran a marathon, I'm successful. The question is, A, why did you run the marathon? And what happens after you've completed the marathon? Do you just keep running marathons? What happens if you break your leg and you can no longer run marathons? You know, a lot of people set financial goals. I'm successful when I make my first million. Okay, now I have to make my second million. Success is a feeling, and it's the feeling of contribution. So your bus driver in Queens, if he has decided that his job as a bus driver is to ensure that everyone who gets on his bus feels better about themselves because they got on his bus and not another bus. And so he greets them with a smile, he says good morning, he says goodbye, that people will remember that ride that they took with him, versus this vice president of the company who's made it about himself and his financial goals. He's the one who's unhappy, as opposed to seeing those around him succeed and those around him go home with a love of their day, you know, because they come to work in his company every day. So I still believe success and good leadership are about service to others.
Rule number 28, learn to communicate your why.
What you'll find is that the better you are at communicating your why, people will want to work for you regardless of the opportunity that you afford them. Like, they want to be a part of it.
Yeah.
We do a little thing, which we've been doing for years and years and years, called a give and take. Whenever there's any kind of relationship, whether it's an outside partnership or even somebody who joins our team, we do something called a give and take, where we want somebody to be selfish and selfless within the relationship. So not give and get, but give and take. So we'll ask them, what is it that you have to give to us, that you have that you think that we need, right? And they'll tell us. And then we'll say, great, what is it that you selfishly want from us? and we want them to tell us what they can get from us and no
I
one
believe
else.
in that so much.
And when
man.
when those things match, you have a balanced relationship. Because, so for example, I've had it with people. They'll tell me what they have to offer, and that's awesome because that's what I want. And then they'll say what they want to take, and they go, "Oh, I want to work with smart people." I'm like, plenty of smart people. What is it you want to take from me? They're like, "Oh, I want to help build something." Wonderful, do that anywhere. What do you want to take selfishly from me that you can get nowhere else? And if they can't answer the question, I want to engage in a relationship, and the reason is because in time, the relationship is unbalanced, they're going to be giving, but they're not taking, and I don't even know how to give them what they want, then they'll complain they're not making enough money, or because it's not balanced.
That's right.
Rule number 29, play the infinite game.
The game of business is an infinite game, right? It obeys all the rules. There are known and unknown players. You don't know all the competitors necessarily in one industry to another. The rules are changeable. We haven't all agreed what the rules are. And there is no winning the game of business, right? The game just perpetuates. In fact, the game of business has existed longer than every single company on the planet today, and it will outlast every single company on the planet today. If you look at the Dow Index of 30-something odd companies that make up the Dow Index, something like 70 or 80% of those companies are 35 years or younger, right? So it gets me thinking, if you listen to the language that companies use, they don't know what game they're in. They talk about being number one. Talk about beating their competition based on what agreed upon criteria, based on what agreed upon time frame. Is it market share? Is it profits? Is it revenues? Square footage, number of employees? Over what? 1 month, 5 months, 6 months, a year, 5 years, 10 years, the life of the company? I haven't agreed to those rules. And so companies can arbitrarily declare themselves number one in anything they want if they set the standards and the time frames. And the only reason we do these things on an annualized basis is we tend to compare ourselves to other organizations annually is only because we pay taxes annually. If we paid taxes every 18 months, that would be sort of the standard. But again, we still haven't agreed what the metrics are to be number one. That means the companies that are playing the infinite game are playing against most of the others who are playing the finite game, means those finite companies find themselves in quagmire. Almost every single bankruptcy, not almost every single bankruptcy is a company that's run out of the will or the resources to play. They drop out of the game. The game will persist. Another company will fill their space. It's not like the business stops or the industry ends. And the companies that are playing the infinite game will frustrate those finite players, which I absolutely adore. So I spoke at an education summit for Microsoft. I also spoke at an education summit for Apple. Now, I would say about 70 to 80% of the executives at Microsoft spent about 70 to 80% of their PowerPoints talking about how to beat Apple. At the Apple Summit, 100% of the executives spent 100% of their presentations talking about how to help teachers teach and how to help students learn. One was obsessed with their journey, with their vision, with their cause. The other one was obsessed with their competition. Guess who's stuck in quagmire? Guess who's frustrated by their competition?
Rule number 30, tell great stories.
So I'll tell you another story. It's a personal story. It's not one that I share very often. And it profoundly changed the course of my life. In August of 2011, I had the opportunity to visit Afghanistan with the United States Air Force. I had done some work with the mobility forces. These are the people that fly the tankers and the cargo planes and Air Force One, all the big planes. And the general said to me, "Simon, you've gotten to know us quite well. It would mean a lot to me if you would go to either Iraq or Afghanistan to see our men and women perform their mission. Would you be willing to go?" So I said yes. They picked Afghanistan. Now, I didn't tell my parents where I was going because I didn't want them to worry. I told them I was going away with the Air Force, true. I told them I was going to be out of touch for a while because I was going to be on a lot of planes, true. I told them I was going to Germany, true. I just didn't tell them from Germany I was going to Afghanistan. And I had no responsibility. I was simply going as an observer. I had 2 officers who were assigned to be my escorts,
And we met basically for the first time at Penn Station in Philadelphia, where we drove to Dover Air Force Base, where we would leave for Germany. We took a big C-5 cargo plane. In Germany, we changed planes and we got on a KC-135 tanker built in 1956. I was on a plane built in 1956, where we flew to Bagram. We landed in the middle of the night. We touched down, and the big door on the side of the plane had opened, but we hadn't gotten off the plane yet. We'd been on the ground for maybe 10 minutes, and the base came under rocket attack. 3 rockets hit 100 yards off our nose. This is how my trip began. Now, if you've ever been in a war zone, for those of you in the room who've ever been in a war zone, you know this. You have all the feelings you're supposed to have, you just don't have them at the right times. Weirdly, I was incredibly relaxed, and maybe that's because the people I was with were incredibly relaxed and I felt safe. The panic came later. We're eventually given the all clear, and we went to our housing. Now, the purpose of being in Afghanistan, we were going to be in the country for up to 30 hours, and the goal was to witness an airdrop mission. They're not regularly scheduled, so we had to find out if there was one as soon as we got there, and it turns out there was one first thing in the morning. So we got about 2.5 hours, 3 hours of sleep, and we went and got on this airdrop mission, which was incredible. We sat in the back of a C-17. We flew about an hour and a half, 2 hours out to the middle of nowhere, Afghanistan. The plane dropped down to about 2,000 feet. The back door opened, and we sat there and watched as cargo flew out the back so we could resupply an Army forward operating base. It was an amazing, amazing experience. We then flew back to Bagram, and the goal was to come back home. There's no regularly scheduled flight, so we have to sort of find out what flights we can get on, and it's always up to the discretion of the pilots. We found a flight that was leaving shortly after we got back, and so we asked the pilots, and they said, absolutely, we can join their flight. And we waited and waited and waited and waited and waited and waited. And eventually, we got on the plane. We were all strapped in, literally 5 minutes from leaving. And the pilot walked up to us and said, I'm sorry, we need to bump you guys. We need to make more room for stretchers. It was carrying wounded warriors out of theater, and they needed our space. If there's ever a good reason to get bumped off a plane, this was it. So we got off the plane, and we went to look for another flight. And that's when we found out there were no other flights until Tuesday, and this was only Saturday. I was going to get stuck in Afghanistan for at least 4 days, maybe longer, because we don't know what we're going to get on Tuesday, and I have no way of telling my parents. They're not going to hear from me on the date that I told them that I would get home. Immediately, every fiber of my being sank. And I remember becoming completely panicked and completely preoccupied with one thing: my happiness, my safety, and my comfort. And I didn't care who had to go out of their way to get me what I wanted. I remember there was a public affairs officer who said, I can get you to Kyrgyzstan, but you don't have the right visa. And I looked at him and I said, you get me on that plane. I don't talk to people like that. And I could see myself becoming this person that I hated. Some of us in the room have worked for somebody in our careers who wants the next promotion, and they don't care that they have to turn our lives upside down so they can get what they want. I was becoming that person. We went back to our housing, and I lay down on the bed and closed my eyes. My mind was racing. I was convinced that there would be another rocket attack on the base. I was convinced that I was going to get hit. I was convinced that my parents were going to find out that I was in Afghanistan when an Air Force officer knocks on the door. I was convinced. Paranoia, fear, everything that you can imagine swept over me. One of the officers that I was traveling with said, I'm going to see if I can get us on another flight, and he left the room. The other officer, thinking I was asleep just because my eyes were closed, said, well, I'm going to go to the gym then, and he walked out and turned off the lights for me. I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing. All I wanted to do was get out of there. I regretted saying yes. I regretted being there. I didn't want to be there. I'm in the purpose business. I write and talk about this sense of why and sense of purpose in our lives. So I started to remind myself, Simon, you need a purpose. You don't have a purpose. You need a purpose. So I started inventing one. You're here to tell their story. It worked for like a few minutes, and then I would slide back into my fear and panic again. And I realized what was happening to me is I was living the equivalent of an unfulfilled life compressed into 24 hours. I had an amazing day. I got to see something that most people will never get to see in their entire lives, except I didn't want to wake up and do it again the next day. And I think many of us do the same thing. We confuse moments of happiness with joy and fulfillment. We confuse winning a piece of business, getting a promotion, getting an award, getting recognition, doing well on a test with actual deep fulfillment. Those experiences are wonderful, but happiness is fleeting. There's not a single person in this room, absolutely zero, who's walking around with an amazing sense of accomplishment for that test that you aced a year ago. That feeling is gone. Fulfillment is something entirely different. It's something you carry with you on a daily basis, whether you're enjoying the day or not. It's like loving your family. You may not like your family every day, but you love your family every day. One is fleeting, the other is lasting. And this is what was happening to me. I'd realized that I had this amazing day, and I was confusing happiness and fulfillment. And so I gave up. I lay in that bed, paranoid, scared, and depressed, and I literally gave up. I decided that if I was going to get stuck here, I might as well make myself useful. And so I decided I was going to volunteer. I would speak anywhere they wanted me to speak. I would carry boxes and sweep floors. All I wanted to do was serve some of those amazing people that I'd met on this trip. I wanted to serve those who served others. And instantly, this incredible calm came over me. I was even excited. This is what fulfillment means. It's not the fleeting joys that we may experience. It's not the accomplishments that we achieve. It's the opportunity to serve those who serve others. And upon making this realization, I had nothing but joy and calm and excitement and peace. It was like a movie. The timing was uncanny. Upon making this amazing realization, the door flung open, and it was Major Throckmorton. He said, I got us on a flight that's been redirected, but we have to go now. We have to go now. If we don't leave now, they're going to leave without us. Where's Matt? I said, he's at the gym. So we ran to the gym. We got him off the treadmill. And we ran back. No time to shower. He put his uniform back on. We grabbed all our stuff, and we ran out to the flight line. When we got out to the flight line, we could see the plane we were going to take home. See, big C-17, it was sitting right out there on the tarmac. And as soon as we got there, a security cordon came down, and they wouldn't let us out to the plane. Because somewhere else on base, they were having a fallen soldier ceremony. And out of respect, when they have the fallen soldier ceremony, everything stops. And so we sat on the curb and waited. And I told the guys what I had gone through in the bed just moments ago. And I cried like a baby. And this is one of the things a lot of people don't realize about the military. Crying is just fine. Those guys kept me safe, not just physically, they made me feel safe. And I felt totally comfortable telling them what I was going through and how I felt. Eventually, the security cordon came up, and they let us out to the plane. We would be the only 3 passengers aboard this plane other than the crew. What I didn't tell you is the reason the flight was redirected is because we would be carrying home the fallen soldier for whom they just had the ceremony. The Army brought the flag-draped casket on board. All the Air Force crew stood in a line at perfect attention. I'm a civilian. I put my hand on my heart. I felt kind of stupid, so I stood at attention with the Air Force crew as the Army laid the casket in the middle of the aircraft. They all did a very slow 8-count salute. They marched off the plane, and we watched them hugging and crying as they walked away. The crew got to work strapping this precious cargo down. We then had a 9.5-hour overnight flight back to Germany, where I slept right next to this casket. On every other plane I went on, we talked, we joked. Barely a word was spoken in nearly 10 hours. On every other flight, I visited the cockpit and hung out with the crew. I didn't visit the cockpit once. And I will tell you, it was one of the greatest honors of my life. Having just gone through this incredibly strange experience on the ground, I had the honor of bringing home somebody who understands service much deeper than I will ever understand it. Serve those who serve others, and you will live a life of joy and fulfillment.
Rule number 31,